ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm welcome to Professor Ian Plimer, Australian geologist and author, and apparently well known in ever-decreasing circles. And indeed, despite being the same age as Joe Biden, Ian here is still moderately sharp.
Ladies and gentlemen, although the third word is a bit dubious after some of those I met last night, I'm concerned about our poor children. They suffer porn at school. This is child abuse. They're getting given nonsense, absolute nonsense. And these kids, when they finish up at school, they can't write, they can't spell, they can't think, they get English all wrong, they put the emphasis on the wrong syllable, they don't know grammar, they ain't know nothing about grammar, and these kids come out as unemployable. And then they go to university, and they're made even more unemployable. Now, having spent a large amount of my life in the university system, I think I know how it works from within. And the university system is full of eminently unemployable people. And if they were not working in a university, they would be out of a job. And there are many fields in universities now which are totally nonsense, non-scholarship. I had a former colleague today from the University of Melbourne send me their seminar program. Apparently there is a seminar at the University of Melbourne, which we are told is the best university in this country. There's a seminar by a professor of inhuman geography. This is real, from the University of London. And she is going to be talking about geology, gender, climate, and reality. That's the title of her talk. Now, what's the world come to? That's what these kids are getting exposed to. And these kids at school don't know where their food comes from. They don't know where their fibre comes from. They don't know where their energy comes from. And they end up coming out of school absolutely terrified and suffering eco-anxiety, having been exposed to a decade or so of weirdos and activists and creeps and people who sniff hair. And these kids have not had an education. And a lot of them live in cities. And their life experience comes from living in an apartment and looking at a screen. They don't fall out of a tree and break their arm. They don't go out shooting rabbits. They don't go outdoors. They're frightened of the outdoors. I've had them as students. They're frightened. Really frightened to walk up a hill. And you find that the meat eaters get up to the top of the hill first. The vegetarians are puffing out sort of carrot juice or something halfway up. And the vegans are still trying to work out how to open the door. So I've seen these people, and they are city people who have no idea. Now, what we geologists do is we read the land. We're trained observers, and we look at things and we read things. And a few of you will recall when you came up to buy a book from me, a wonderful book, I'll talk about it later. I said, "Oh, you're a bushie." I said, "How'd you know?" I said, "The way you hold yourself." And you can observe. And I observe things in nature. I observe the landscapes. I can tell you the history of an area from looking at the landscape. And when I've been outside and done this with kids, and Dick Smith and I used to run a boot camp for feral kids up at Arkaroola in the far North Flinders Ranges, these kids were set alight. They'd never been taught to enjoy nature. They'd never been taught to read the land and understand the land. So these kids end up with no common sense. They end up with conclusions that are not based on facts, and they end up in blaming their parents for the environmental mess that they claim we live in. And for some time they've suffered this child abuse. Well, I've also been suffering child abuse, I've had my daughter at me for years to write books for children, and it's happened. And last year at CPAC, I committed to writing a book for children. Well, it's here, it's happened. During my controversial life, it's so controversial because I speak the truth and I use facts. I get cancelled, and I've been cancelled by universities. In Hobart, earlier in the year, I had 2 pubs cancel me. Can you imagine me being cancelled by a pub? And it was at a private dinner. I was just going to talk at a private dinner. I wasn't going to enrich them sitting up at the bar. And this book we picked up from our printer on Thursday in Brisbane and drove it down here. But the Friday before that, while it was still being printed, on Facebook they'd done a fact check of this book. The book wasn't even out. No one could see it. No one had ever seen it. And apparently the book is false. So I'm here promoting what is a wonderful false book. So why the hell do I do it? Well, our kids are being abused. I have the knowledge and I have the passion. I don't mind being shot at, and I do like it when people criticise me because it's a wonderful opportunity to correct their grammar. So this is called The Little Green Book, and older people will recognise that that title has been stolen. Well, it's been stolen from a country that steals copyright anyway, so I might as well steal theirs. And the first one is for kids from 8 until 12, and it's for ankle biters, I've called it. And I go into food, I go into cookies. I've used that word, kids know what it is, but I've used it because this is an international book. And gone through how you make a cookie, how you've actually got to grow wheat, and you need fertiliser, and you need that liquid, a really important liquid that keeps this country alive. It isn't water, it's diesel. And if you don't have diesel for ploughing, for weeding, for harvesting, for processing and for transport of food to the cities, we're dead. We've got about 10 days of diesel in this country that we can get very quickly. We're dead otherwise. Kids have got to know this. That is risk. You can manage risk, but they've got to know it. And then I give them various features where we convert the food into energy and into them growing. And of course there's waste product. You breathe in 0.04%, I don't use those numbers, but 0.04% carbon dioxide, and you breathe out 4%. So you're using carbon from food to make carbon dioxide. If you go to bed and weigh yourself before you go to bed, and if you haven't been up for a piddle, weigh yourself in the morning, you'll be about 200 grams lighter. That's because you've been breathing out carbon dioxide. So in this book, I talk about poo. Kids are fascinated with poo. I talk about why wee is yellow, and don't drink it. You don't die, but it's not good for you. But I say that poo is poisonous, which is why we wash our hands afterwards. But the larger section of this book, and I think of my grandkids and others, the largest section is about farts. Now, my field of expertise is in geochemistry, and the chemistry of farts, and I kid you not, is really fascinating. And so I'm pointing out to kids about various things. Don't do this at home. Scientific experiments, how do I stink out a whole bus on a school excursion? I tell them how to do that. I do warn them that farts move at 10 kilometres an hour, and you got to hang on a bit, because if you smell it, you dealt it. I tell them what to eat, what chemicals come out, but basically I'm telling them about the carbon cycle and how without carbon there is no life. No plants, no animals, no food, no you. And so I've tried to look at body functions to get them to understand that carbon and carbon compounds are not poisons. Your body is made of carbon compounds. Your body needs carbon compounds, and we get rid of it. We exhale it, we excrete it, and carbon compounds are the building block of life. I failed this morning to get Rowan Dean to read this out, but I will read it out to you. I was on Outsiders this morning. I wanted Rowan to read this because he rather likes the chap I've mentioned here, and it is, there is a video of a man eating his own earwax in the Australian Parliament. Yuck! He later became Australia's Prime Minister. Could you become Prime Minister if you eat earwax in public? And then I say, do an internet search using the keywords Rudd, earwax, eat. And this book is meant to be seditious, it's meant to be fun, and it's meant to be for you parents and grandparents to read to your 8 to 12-year-olds. And it's really about how food is processed in your body, because kids that age think of food. Open the fridge, oh, there's nothing to eat, when it's crammed full, you know it. And volume 2 of the Little Green Book, this is for teens, and that's the most important group. And this is written in a style of the series Horrible Histories, which some of you might know. And there's little drop-downs, little boxes, a little box here. Do you think there would be warming or cooling after the Little Ice Age? Now, we're currently after the Little Ice Age. And what I'm saying with these kids is that hurricanes, coral reef collapse, atoll collapse, bushfires, floods, they're all quite normal. We've had temperature rises and falls in the past far greater than now. And the key driver of temperature is not carbon dioxide, which is plant food. It's actually other things. It's how far we are from that source of heat, the sun, how the continents are shifting around. So the first part is to have a lot of fun and be very, very positive, to point out to the kids the world is not ending. It's a great place, and you are so lucky you're living a much better life than many other kids. And go a little bit into cycles of climate, how these cycles vary depending upon where the continents are, what the Earth's orbit is doing, what the sun is doing, and give them a few examples of all these scary critters that lived in Greenland 2 million years ago, when it was only 10 to 17 degrees warmer. And I've got the kids then to a stage thinking, well, why am I fed all this rubbish at school? And at that stage, I then come in about very cold times in the Little Ice Age. And during very cold times in the 17th century, and I've got a graph there showing the number of women who were harvested to be burned or drowned, and temperature. And the killing of witches was very much related to temperature, because everyone knew it was the women, the witches, who led to bad harvests, so we go out and kill them. Now, the funny thing about that is, just after they'd finished harvesting and killing all these witches, temperature warmed up. So it's obvious, you know, by killing witches, you change the global climate. Now, that's really silly. And then I point out other silly times on the planet, like the tulip craze in Holland, and point out that you have the great honour of living in one of these really silly times on planet Earth. And this is why you're being told stuff that's absolute rubbish, when common sense can show you that it's the exact opposite. And I go in a little bit on fossil fuels, how coal is made, and point out that it was coal that saved the forests. Once we had coal being used in industry and not charcoal, we didn't chop down our forests, and we could still make our glass and steel and not kill off the forests. I point out to them that when the petrol-driven car appeared, it was a blessing. Thank God we didn't have all this horse poo in the street washing into the water wells. And it was fossil fuel cars that saved a lot of people's lives from disease, from horse poo. I then go into the whales, how we used to kill whales to get whale oil for lighting, for our lanterns. Thank God we had mineral oil that we use then in kerosene lanterns. And so I give them stories their teachers would never give them. It's all true. So we also talk about wind energy and a little bit of what Nick Cater was talking about, how these pollute, how these are horrible things to look at, and the chemicals that are leaked out from these awful monstrosities. You can't go into the economics of these things with teenage kids, because if they run out of money, they put their hand out. They don't go out and earn it. So you've got to approach it another way. But the way in which I really wanted to approach it was the typical whinge that you get from a teenager. Oh, that's not fair. Well, I tell them, you're swanning around in your electric car and you're eating meals, and it's not fair that some black kid who's a slave in the Congo is dying to keep you swanning around. So I also point out that there are many kids your age who are getting a meal cooked, and it's using an electric appliance or a gas appliance, whereas a third of the world don't have that. They have to use dung, leaves, twigs, whatever they can have for a fire, a low temperature fire that releases a lot of carcinogens. They die young, as do their mothers. That's not fair, so don't you whinge about it. I talk about the fact that 30% of the world, if they want to go out and have a poo, they've got to go into the bush. There is no toilet. So I'm trying to kill off that teenage argument about it's not fair. And the last argument I go into in the second book, the one for the teens, is about pollution. That carbon dioxide is plant food. There's a lot of pollution around, but the world is a much better place now than it was. And I go into, in kids' language, I go into studies done of global pollution and how we are living in the very best times to be a human on planet Earth. The calorific intake, the safety, the health, everything is better than 100 or 200 years ago. So the world is becoming better. It's not falling apart. It's not due to your parents, and that you can contribute by doing something, by holding up a sign saying climate action now. I question these kids. What does that mean? What does it really mean? What can you do? And I challenge them, saying that things like your mobile phone, if you didn't have reliable electricity, you couldn't charge it. If you didn't have fossil fuels, it couldn't be made. Kids don't walk to school any longer or go on their bikes, so if you want to go to school, you need a motor vehicle. And so I'm basically forcing those kids to think, where does my food come from? Where do all the commodities come from? What do I do? And the third one, the third volume, and this is for post-teen, so I've called it for 20s and wrinklies, and I'm yet to see a wrinkly here, but anyway, I guess there are a few around. This is a summary of my first year university performances to students. I'd come into a room like this, there'd be 500 students, and you'd stagger in and you could see in their faces, what the hell's going on here? What's going on? And I wouldn't give lectures. I would ask questions. And so I've given a history of the planet. And the history of the planet starts a long, long time ago, and I go right back, and I started by saying it was a dark and stormy night on a Thursday, 4,567 million years ago. And so I put in silly things there. On the first page, I have got some scientific evidence that shows you that the moon is made of green cheese. And then I say, well, tell me I'm wrong. Obviously it's not. But this is training in the scientific method. You don't use one piece of evidence, you use evidence from everywhere. So I go through the history of the planet and human history, and basically you have to conclude saying, oh, blimey, we've seen it all before. We've seen massive fires. We've seen massive floods. We've seen it all before. I go into the extinction events. We've had 5 major mass extinctions since we had complex life on Earth, at least 20 minor mass extinctions. Extinction's normal. Shuffle off now, become extinct before the crowd. And I then go into a speculation as to what the next human extinction might be. And I look at the sort of species that might become extinct, like when we evolve into Homo macdonaldsensis. Why will you become extinct? And so there's a lot of fun for kids to actually work out things. And I go through the 6 major ice ages and tell them a few things that their grandmother doesn't tell them, which is your job. You've got to do it. Get one of these and read it to them. We've had 6 major ice ages. Each one of those ice ages started when we had more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than now. It is not possible over time that carbon dioxide has driven climate change. I then look at what's happened over the last 500 million years. Over the last 500 million years, the carbon dioxide content has decreased from 0.7% to 0.04%. We are actually in a crisis. There is not enough plant food in the atmosphere. And I point out, using what the founder of Greenpeace, Patrick Moore, says, I used his line, that you have an environmental responsibility to put carbon dioxide back where it came from, into the atmosphere, because we don't have enough of it, and if we halved it in the next inevitable glaciation, then plants will die. Well, there's some good news there, but of course certain people with certain diets will shuffle off. But so there is some good news, but I point out that we've had a decrease in carbon dioxide, and I've got a wonderful graph there that just shows the pulling out of carbon dioxide when we formed all of the coals about 300 million years ago. And we formed coal then because we didn't have the bacteria that would decompose vegetation. Then I look at the climate over the last 300 million years, and we can blame it on Gondwana, that ancient continent that sat over the South Pole. It's broken up, but Antarctica is still there. And if you want climate change, you have to move Antarctica. And we have been cooling for the last 50 million years. And in that 50 million year time, we've eventually come into an ice age. We're in one now. It started on a Tuesday, 34 million years ago. And that drives climate. It's the coming and going of the ice. And I then use that to go into the cycles of climate and what drives them. So this is a book for adults and for senior teens. I have, with some of my previous books, had people say, oh, they're too scientific. Well, fine, this is the one for you. So what is happening is that outside there is a table where these 3 books are being sold, 20 each. That's it, $20 for each one of for that book, and that book. So eat your heart out, Warren Mundine. They're cheaper than your books. And so $20 for each of them. Now, taking my money, because I'm untrustworthy with money, so my daughter's there taking the money, and I'm signing the books for everyone. So right outside, when we finish up, there's one more talk after me. When we finish up, I'll be there to sign books. Now, the speaker that's coming last night, and I don't know whether she was in the grip of Bacchus or whether she was trying to control me a little bit, which is a futile task, but she asked me to make my presentation dull and precise. That's what I've tried to do. So thank you for attending, and thank you for CPAC yet again having me, being controversial. Thank you. Thank you.